Hi everyone, welcome to Introduction to Programming with Python. This is lecture 10. In this lecture I'm talking about functions, built-in functions and user-defined functions and a little bit about methods. So let's define what a function is. A function is essentially a set of statements that take some input, which we also called arguments or parameters, does some specific computation and then produces an output. So the question arises why we need functions. The reason behind creating a function is something that's known in the programming world as DRY, do not repeat yourself. A function is some code that you put together and that you think will be used and reused again and again, and then you just want the entire chunk of code to be written once and then you can just call it or reuse it again and again. So once you have a function, you can do all of that together. It's also easier to find errors in a single chunk of code rather than writing the same code again and again and then debugging it. Another advantage of using functions is that we can break down complex operations into simpler steps and write a function for each step and then call those steps rather than writing the code again and again. So instead of talking here about functions, let's quickly go to Spider and see how we can define our own functions. And in fact, actually before actually writing our own functions, let's see some built-in functions. By built-in functions, I mean the functions that are already provided to us by Python. The one very popular one that we've been using right from day one is the print function. It enables us to print a string or a concatenation of strings. For example, we did hello world in our very first lecture, or I think the second lecture, and this is a built-in function. What essentially this does is that it takes this input argument, which is my string right now, this is hello world, and it produces that output here in my console. There is some code that's already written that already comes in with my Python installation that gets executed whenever I call it. So when I'm actually writing the function, this is called calling the function. Right? So this is calling the function print. Similarly, we know another function, len. This is used to find the length of a string, and this is also a built-in function. It's len, and you can actually go and find the length of this string here, right? So the length of the string is 12 because there are 12 characters in this string. So this is another built-in function. Now we're going to write our own function, because then we'll understand how functions are written, how they're called, what are arguments and parameters. So I'm going to write a function that calculates the area of a circle. And why this is important is because I can go and write an expression and calculate the area of a circle. But what if I need to calculate the area of 100 circles? So in that situation, what I can do is I can create a function called area of a circle and then call it again and again. Let me show you how a function is written. So this is the syntax. def is the keyword. This defines my function. This is also called the header of a function. And then comes the name that I want my function to take. For example, this is area of circle. This is what I want my function to be. And then comes the parameters, or the value of the parameter will be the argument. So right now I'll define my parameter as radius, because using that radius I'll be calculating the area of different circles. Right? Now within my function, when I write the header, and this is done automatically in Spider, but you need to be careful if you're using some other text editors, that it has to be indented from the left. Right? So this is done automatically here. The rest of the code should be indented from the left 4 spaces. In my case, I don't need to worry about that because I'm using Spider. So pi is the value that I need, and then essentially area will be calculated pi r squared, right? So pi radius and then squared. Another important part of a function's syntax is the return word. This is a keyword, and your function must return some value, right? And in my case, my return value is my area. Now we'll see how this return value is important. Let me first go and execute this function, because that's how I create this function. As you can see on the right hand side, my function is created. Now it doesn't show any output because I haven't called it yet. the way I call it can be different for different situations. I can directly go and say area of circle, the name of my function, and then give radius a value. Now this value is the argument. My parameter was my radius. I can also say go and print this, which is more about getting the output, because I can format my print in different ways as we have seen in previous lectures, right? I can also assign the outcome of my function to a variable. Let's say I create a variable a and I can assign the outcome of my function to this variable, and then I can use that variable for different computations, right? And then I can say print a. These are different methods, these are different techniques of calling a function. So one thing to remember is that when we create a function, it creates this code somewhere, but essentially when we need to use it, we need to call it. The other thing to remember is that a function must return something. If instead of return I use a print statement here, let me do that and see how, like, what the difference is. My function will still be created, and then when I say print area of a circle, I get this value none, and this none is added to my function because I did not have a return value. So you might encounter this error multiple times while using functions, and that's because your function is not returning a value and you're printing that. But that's not a syntax error, your function will still execute. So this was essentially defining a function and calling functions. In the next lecture, I'll talk about some built-in functions and some methods. Thank you.